I had always loved the small, picturesque town of Miller's Crossing, a place where everyone knew each other and crime was practically non existent. So when I inherited my grandmother's old Victorian house on the edge of town, I was thrilled. My grandma had passed away a few months back, leaving behind a lifetime of memories and a house filled with antique furniture and dusty knickknacks. I decided to move in temporarily to sort through her belongings and maybe get a change of scenery. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time cleaning, organizing, and occasionally chatting with the friendly neighbors who stopped by to offer condolences and share stories about my grandma. It wasn't until the fourth night that things started to get strange. It began with the knocking. I was in bed just about to drift off to sleep when I heard a soft, rhythmic knocking coming from downstairs. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling, but the knocks were so deliberate, too patterned to be random creaks. I got up and grabbed the flashlight that I kept on the nightstand and cautiously made my way downstairs. The knocking continued, echoing through the empty halls. It seemed to be coming from the basement. I hesitated at the top of the basement stairs, the flashlight beam trembling slightly in my hand. I took a deep breath and descended, one creaky step at a time. When I reached the bottom, the knocking stopped. I swept the flashlight around the basement, illuminating dusty shelves and cobweb-covered furniture, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I shrugged it off as my imagination playing tricks on me and went back to bed. The next morning, I found something odd in the kitchen. On a small table where my grandma used to have her breakfast lay an old leather-bound journal. I didn't remember seeing it before, and curiosity piqued. I opened it. The journal belonged to my grandmother. It detailed her life in Miller's Crossing, but towards the end, the entries became increasingly erratic and paranoid. She wrote about hearing strange noises at night, about feeling watched, and about something she referred to only as the Watcher. The last entry sent chills down my spine. The Watcher is coming for me. It knocks to warn me, to let me know it's near. I fear my time is running out. That night, the knocking started again. This time it was louder, more insistent. I followed the sound to the basement once more, my heart pounding in my chest as I reached the bottom step. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Panic set in, and I fumbled for my phone to use his light when I finally managed to turn it on. I saw it. A figure stood in the far corner of the basement, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and thin, his eyes glowing faintly. The knocking resumed louder and faster as the figure began to move towards me. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. I could still hear the knocking now, accompanied by a low, guttural growl. I didn't sleep at all that night, my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. The Watcher is coming for me. The next day, I packed up my belongings and left Miller's Crossing, vowing never to return. I don't know what the Watcher was or why it haunted my grandmother, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, somewhere, waiting. To this day, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of knocking and wonder if it's the Watcher that's finally found me. Part 2. After I left Miller's Crossing, I thought I could leave the Watcher behind. I moved back to the city, renting a small apartment and trying to put the past behind me. Life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be, after such an ordeal. But the knocking never truly left me. It would come sporadically, always at night, always when I was alone. Months passed, and I started to believe it was all in my head. I even started seeing a therapist who assured me that trauma could manifest in strange ways. I was beginning to feel more at ease, starting to think maybe, just maybe, I could move on. Then, one evening, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, just my name written in a neat, old-fashioned script. I hesitated before opening it, a sense of dread creeping over me. Inside the package was an old photography of my grandmother standing in front of the house in Miller's Crossing, holding a baby. I recognized the baby as myself. Attached to the photo was a note, "You can't escape what's in your blood." I dropped the photo and stepped back, my mind racing. How could someone know about the Watcher? My grandmother never spoke of it to anyone, and I had kept my own experiences to myself. That night, the knocking returned, louder and more persistent than ever. It seemed to come from all around me, echoing through the apartment. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the sound was unmistakable. Then came the growling. I couldn't stay in my apartment. Grabbing only my keys and my phone, I fled, driving aimlessly through the city until I ended up at a 24-hour downer. I sat there, drinking coffee and trying to calm my nerves until the sun came up. Over the next few days, I researched everything I could about the Watcher. I dug through old town records, folklore websites, and anything that might give me a clue. One night, deep in an obscure forum, I found a post from someone in a neighboring town who described a similar entity. A tall, thin figure that knocked and growled, tormenting their family for generations. Desperate, I contacted the poster, a woman named Evelyn. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. She looked tired and said she hadn't slept in years. She listened as I recounted my experiences, nodding along as she had heard it all before. "You're not the first," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Watcher is an ancient entity, tied to certain bloodlines. Once it finds you, it never truly leaves." "Is there any way to stop it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There was always ways to keep it at bay," she replied. "Symbols, rituals, protections passed down through the generations. But once it's attached to your bloodline, it will always come back." Evelyn showed me a series of protective symbols and explained the ritual that her family used to keep the Watcher at a distance. I thanked her and left, feeling a mixture of hope and fear. That night, I performed the ritual and placed the symbols around my apartment. The knocking didn't come, and for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. But peace was fleeting. A week later, I found a new note on my kitchen table. "You can't hide forever." I realized that I couldn't run from the Watcher. It would always find me, no matter where I went or what I did. My only hope was to learn more, to find a way to break the curse that haunted my family for generations. And so, I returned to Miller's Crossing, to the old Victorian house and the secrets it held. I had to face the Watcher head on, to uncover the truth that my grandmother had hidden so well. Because if I didn't, I knew I would never be free. Returning to Miller's Crossing felt like stepping back into a nightmare. The old Victorian house loomed ominously at the end of the street, its windows dark and lifeless. I parked my car and stared at it for a long moment, summoning the courage to go inside. The protective symbols and rituals Evelyn had taught me were my only defense against the Watcher, and I clung to them like a lifeline. The house smelled of dust and decay, as it had been abandoned for years rather than months. I made my way to the basement, the air going colder with each step. The door creaked as I opened it, and I felt the chill run down my spine. The basement was just as I left it, filled with old furniture and boxes of my grandmother's belongings. I set up candles around the room, placing the protective symbols in a circle. I began the ritual, chanting the words Evelyn had taught me. The air grew heavy, and I felt the presence watching me from the shadows. The knocking started again, but this time it was different, more insistent, more demanding. As I finished the ritual, the candles flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness, and I heard the growling closer than ever before. My flashlight flickered to life, and I saw it. The watcher, standing at the edge of the circle. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his form seemed to shift and waver. "You cannot banish me," it hissed, its voice echoing in my mind. "I am bound to your blood. I will always find you." Summoning all my courage, I stepped forward, holding out the symbols. "What do you want?" I demanded. The watcher paused, as if considering my question. "You carry a curse, passed down through your family. Your grandmother tried to hide it, but she failed. The curse is tied to this house, to the land it stands on. To break it, you must understand its origin." With that, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. I knew what I had to do. I spent the next few days combing through my grandmother's journals and old town records, piecing together the history of the house and my family. I discovered that the land once belonged to a man named Jonathan Miller, one of the town's founders. He had been accused of witchcraft and executed in the late 1600s, cursing the land and all who lived on it with his dying breath. My ancestors had unknowingly built their home on the cursed ground, and the watcher was the manifestation of that curse. Armed with this knowledge, I sought out Evelyn once more. Together, we devised a plan to lift the curse. It required a powerful ritual, one that would break the bond between the watcher and my bloodline. It was risky, but it was my only hope. We prepared everything in the basement of the old house, setting up an intricate array of symbols and candles. As night fell, we began the ritual. The air grew heavy and the temperature dropped. The knocking started again, echoing through the house. The watcher appeared, his form more solid than ever before. It howled in rage as we chanted the words of the ritual, trying to break through the circle. The candles flickered wildly, and I felt the surge of energy building around us. With a final, desperate chant, the circle of symbols glowed brightly, and a shockwave of energy burst from the center. The watcher shrieked and dissolved into a cloud of darkness, which was sucked up into the earth beneath the house. The air cleared, and the knocking stopped. For the first time, the house felt peaceful. The curse had been lifted. Evelyn and I stood in silence for a moment, taking in what we had accomplished. "It's over," she said, her voice filled with relief. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Thank you," I said, grateful beyond words. As I left Miller's Crossing for the last time, I knew the watcher was truly gone. The nightmare was over, and I could finally move on with my life. But I will never forget the terror I had faced or the strength it took to overcome it. The past would always be a part of me, but now, at least, it wouldn't control my future.